Well, the siege is about an incident that we're all quite familiar with. In 2008, November 26th, terrorists entered the Taj Mahal Hotel and many other areas of Mumbai, and what followed was several days of terror, and Adrian will take us into that war zone. Many of you will notice that Vikram Chandra is not Barkha Dutt. He is, in fact, Vikram Chandra, the wonderful author of several books, including Mirrored Minds, Sacred Games, Love and Longing in Bombay, Red Earth and Pouring Rain. Wonderful, wonderful books. He's won several prizes, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and he currently teaches creative writing at the University of Berkeley in California. And we are very grateful to Vikram for impersonating Barkha and being here today. Over to you.
I'll do my best, thanks. So it's a great honor for me to be on stage here with Adrian Levy, who, with Kathy Scott Clark, I think has written some of the most important books dealing with subcontinental history over the past couple of decades. So I'm a great admirer of his work. And this morning, I was looking on my tablet at my very marked up copy of The Siege, and I noticed that a lot of my highlights and exclamation marks were next to David Headley, right, who's this amazing, strange figure that if I invented him and put him in a novel, nobody would believe. So would you give us a little insight into the world of David Headley?
Yeah, can I say, I'm going to say I a lot, and I is we, and everything that I've done since 1994 has been a partnership with Kathy Scott Clark, and I'm going to be filled with the spirit of Kathy Scott Clark here, although she probably delivered this in a much more witty and apposite style. So she's in London with our children at the moment, so think of her as I talk about this. It's a joint project. David Headley was a starting point for us, and I'm sure everybody probably is familiar with him, and I kind of think, who would play him in a Hollywood movie? Would it be a kind of Nick Cage character? Would it be Nick Nolte, someone wild and slightly gone to seed? The thing that's very dramatic about him, my starting point, was watching footage of him being interrogated by the FBI when he was finally caught. What's very intriguing in that footage, the closed, became subsequently closed evidence of David Headley being interrogated, is it's not clear in that footage who's doing the interrogating. You watch it and it's hour after hour and after hour, and at certain points it seems quite clear that Headley has the upper hand, and he's winning the room round. He's very compelling, a compulsive figure. And there's the FBI agents on the back foot listening to the stories, and I feel that is an emblem of this man who had a remarkable upbringing. And if we take the essence of David Headley, it's the essence of what The Siege is as a plot. So he's a hybrid figure. I've called him a chameleon before. And he's the product of a remarkable love affair between a wonderful heiress from Maryland and a remarkable broadcaster from Lahore who met in the 50s while he was working for Voice of America in Washington, D.C. And she was looking for an exit strategy from the United States. And they produced this child, David, or Dawood as he was known then, Dawood Jilani. And Dawood would go and live in Pakistan with his parents, and he would be comfortable and brought up as a young, privileged Pakistani boy living in a cantonment in Lahore. And as he became more and more rebellious, having gone through military school, he would then come back to join Cyril, his mother, initially running an unlikely bar and pub called the Shamiana, and from there running a video store on the Upper West Side, convincing and compelling in New York on the Upper West Side, convincing in Lahore, able to move freely between both societies, the mismatched eyes, one blue, one brown, perhaps telling some of that story. And very, very early on in his life, as we discovered meeting with members of his family in Pakistan and the US, he decided to exploit the dual nationality, the dual heritage, the thing that allowed him to slip seamlessly between two communities. And he decided to do it using a method that would become the key method for everything he did in his life, which was to exploit the friendships of people who were around him, the nearest and dearest. And himself and a school friend, Rana, who was in the military, training to be a military doctor, set off to what was then the Northwest Frontier Province and the tribal areas of Pakistan, And without Rana knowing, Headley's plan was to buy as much heroin as he could and stash it in Rana's boot. And he would use Rana's military credentials to get the heroin transported from NWFP into Peshawar and down to Islamabad, wherever, Lahore, wherever he was going to exit from the country. And the exploitation of Rana, I bring this up, is significant because Headley would go on to exploit everybody who was close to him, the people who, his friends, his pseudo-friends, and even some of his enemies, including the FBI, the American intelligence agents. He got caught, and yet again, the first capture is significant. I won't go through all the captures, but what he did straight away, having been caught by Germans' customs, importing significant amounts of heroin, not small amounts, setting himself up really as a small cartel, was he turned over the syndicate straight away that was with him. And when he was being interrogated by the DEA in America, he gave up a whole host of names and offered a seductive deal. I'll be your inside man. I'll be inside the syndicates. At that stage, most of the heroin moving into America was coming from Pakistan or from South Asia generically. And that deal cemented a friendship, a beautiful liaison with the DEA, which would run really until 1998. And as you might have seen, he would be captured. He'd free himself. He'd spring up another version of the deal with a different group of DEA agents. And this would run until the political landscape changed and the politics of heroin was replaced with the politics of jihad. And 1998, the American embassies explode in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi. And he's caught again in 1998. And what he offers is the New Deal.
Right.
And the New Deal is an American passport holder, dual nationality, who can impregnate, who can inveigle his way inside the new world of rising political Islamism and jihad that America was frantic about.
Right.
Really did not understand, had no means of understanding at that stage who really was behind the 98 blasts. And that position, as offered and then referred to in closed court documents in 1999, would become cemented a year later in 2000 when the USS Cole is spectacularly holed in an unexpected fashion in Yemen, in the port of Aden, and the sinking of the USS Cole would really help to secure his relationship with a curious relationship with the intelligence community. And in a sense, he was the perfect asset.
Right.
You know, he was a wild card, as most assets are.
Right.
He was impossible to know or to control. He was a slippery fish, but at the same time, one would need to be in order to exist and thrive in those communities. And of course, then we know that Headley and his path follows the path of the Mumbai story. And he works really hard to inveigle his way into Lashkar-e-Toiba, which is his front, his portal, the opening space for entering the world of jihad. Lashkar-e-Toiba, the army of the pure, having formed in 1991, really as a state asset to exercise the private war, the proxy war in divided Kashmir, in the Indian-administered Kashmir. And he is wriggling inside Lashkar. Thank you. And a significant factor here is that Lashkar doesn't want him. Lashkar's extraordinarily disciplined, unlike a lot of the jihad outfits. In fact, very, very different to the nature of some of the sectarian outfits operating out of the Punjab. Lashkar has enormous self-control and an enormous program of self-education, which requires submission to the jurisprudence of Lashkar, the philosophy of Lashkar. And then comes the military training. You know, that's very much the cherry on the cake.
Right.
And so it's impossible to be in Lashkar without being part of Lashkar and really submitting to the Lashkar credo. And I think that was a problem for Headley, because Headley submits to no one. And as his mother said, his selfishness probably was born out of his lack of self. No clear identity leads to everything being Headley first. But the plot goes on and on and on. Yes. Headley wriggling his way in, trying to find new ways, him infuriating the intelligence agents who think they're running him, in essence, him not achieving his goals because Lashkar decided that he was unsuitable as a candidate, too now unfit and old to complete the military course, too arrogant to submit to Hadithi ideology, or really to embrace it honestly. And so he's looking at really the dark barrel of a short jihad career with no real fighting, did briefly go to the front line, didn't like it, wasn't keen on the toilets and the training exercise, came back, retreated, looking for another life, had none, was reminded by American intelligence that there was a deal on the table and that it should be honoured. He got a bit lucky, really, in 2006. And I'll speed this up so we can get to the end of the extraordinary story of Nick Nolte, David Headley. In 2006, gradually, he secured meetings with people who had another agenda, and that's something we should pick up on later, maybe. There was a group within Lashkar Toiba who had grown tired since 2002 of the Make Kashmir Bleed ideology. And this group had been creating for the first time a global front of jihad, and they were based out of London and operating in a newsagents in North London. And from there they had an interesting scheme, a network that moved through France and Germany, and they were looking at developing a global position, fundraising and then hitting Western targets, aping the success of Al-Qaeda, since that had done the same with 9/11. And that group was in dissent with the leadership, with a lot of the leadership of Lashkar-e-Toiba, and Headley identified the schism. And the identifying of the schism meant that he thought there was a wedge that he could drive. He's good at driving wedges, so this is something he thought he could do. And I think if he hadn't done that, he would be an also-ran, and we'd know nothing about him, really. Probably would have been killed in an internal cull within the group. At some stage, or if not, done a deal with someone else. But he does notice this schism, and he immediately sidles up to the man responsible for the more global front of Lashkar-e-Toiba, who's running a really sophisticated operation out of Muzaffarabad. We went to the little cell that he was operating, which was known as the Icebox, which is just full of interesting technology and kit. He was keen on his gadgets, and a man who was assaying the world digitally in a way that Lashkar hadn't done before. And he offered his services repeatedly, compellingly. I'm also global. I would like to be like you. I would be part of your faction. And the guy says to him, that's fine, but we need a plan. And Headley's got a plan. He's already thinking of the deal he did with US intelligence, and he's thinking, my plan is Mumbai. Let's choose a mercantile city. Let's make India bleed. Let's not do Kashmir. Let's choose somewhere which would be, in essence, a symbol of India rising, a symbol of multiculturalism. And that plan was roundly rejected by everyone in the Shura and Lashkar-e-Toiba, who were not certain about slipping the traditional state leash, which said, hit Baramulla, hit the LOC, hit Srinagar, hit Badami Bagh. And so he was left in the position of having to sell, come up with reasons, and ally himself with the internationalist brigade, or I use that term loosely, of Lashkar-e-Toiba, who were in awe of the stars of jihad, in awe of Al-Qaeda. So this is the trajectory of some of the plot.
That's an astonishing story. I mean, it's unbelievable. So one of the revelations of the book is that that American intelligence, through Headley, knows that this attack is coming, but they leave him in play because they think he's going to lead them to Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
So to what extent do you think, and they say that they informed Indian intelligence about the coming attack, and Indian intelligence says, well, amongst 3,000 other things, you put one point in there which said, do we have a sort of, does the blame lie on either side? How should they have paid attention to that report?
Well, nation states look after themselves, one should say, and intelligence is about the pursuit of narrow self-interests, disguised as altruism. So I kind of think that, in essence, what was going along right from the beginning was neither, from the Americans' perspective, pro-India, anti-India. It was just the naked pursuit of self-interest. One thing that's absolutely clear, if you think how many years we are before Zero Dark 30, how many years we are before Abbottabad, is that there was a chasm in information. Once Tora Bora had happened and the jihad had moved from the mountains and Al-Qaeda had dispersed into the metropolises of Pakistan and retreated back into its earlier bases in Nairobi and Yemen and a few other key portals. There's a dearth of information and reliable information, and this has been picked up on many other sessions over the last couple of days. And so Headley is a very compelling figure. American passport holder, already offering a conduit to Lashkar-e-Toiba, Lashkar's kind of off the radar for the US. Lashkar's a creature of the Pakistan military and therefore a no-go area for George W. Bush. Trying to cement his security bulwark with Pervez Musharraf, wants to have a love-in with the Pakistan military who are part of that security bulwark.
Right.
And so Lashkar, although prescribed, is not an attractive proposition. But intercept information shows that the more Headley moved towards the radical faction of Lashkar, who were younger,
Right.
more feisty, more interested in the culture of Al-Qaeda, the more he became significant in the eyes of American intelligence.
Right.
And particular intercept information refers to a budding relationship brokered by one officer in particular in Lashkar with a guy called Ilyas Kashmiri. And Kashmiri was this incredible insurgent figure operating at this time in hiding along in many different areas. Waziristan was one base, but also operating out of what was then NWFP, Northwest Frontier Province. And he was kind of the Che Guevara of, if one can say that, loosely speaking, a perverse analogy, but Che Guevara of that movement, irreligious, unpolitical, but a avowed fighter with a huge amount of cunning and strategy. And that movement, the intercepts that show that affair developing between Headley and this character, this pricks interest immediately.
I see.
Because he's no longer simply a man knocking at the door of Lashkar-e-Toiba. Here is an American passport holder who's moving into what was then the de facto military commander of Al-Qaeda. And also, at that time, for trained spotters like myself, what was really significant was that Ilyas Kashmiri was being touted as potentially the successor to Osama. Definitely, a leadership material within Al-Qaeda, broadly speaking, which meant that relationship became very, very significant. A door to Ilyas Kashmiri is a door to Osama, door to the inner shore, not just to the outer berserk fringes of that organization. So, to get round to finally answering the question you asked me, the pursuit of narrow self-interest must be one of those significant motives. How seductive would it be, to have someone in play who can offer you a tantalizing entree to the black box inside that world where we have no vision. But how do we know that happens? I mean, that really should be, what are the metrics? How can we actually say with any confidence between each other that this is other than a fantasy that we're going to dream up for your next novel or mine? And the answer is that there's a drip of intelligence which is shorn of all identifying factors and finds its way to RAW and to IB, external internal intelligence in India, and to other Western agencies that are interested on the edges. And the drip begins when Headley gets his entree into the inner circle of Lashkar-e-Toiba, and they latch onto Mumbai as the plan. And the documents arrive, and the first document is Mumbai is going to be a target. The intelligence bulletin is short of any key identifying features, but it says Mumbai will be a target, and there will be something spectacular happening. And then if we match the intelligence to Headley's position, his reconnaissance trips inside Mumbai, we get to see the beating drum building and matching with Lashkar correspondence and phone calls what's being plotted inside Muzaffarabad, where the plan was hatched. So we have the idea of a naval assault, a marine assault, very unusual, coming all the way from Karachi with landlocked boys who've never set foot in a boat. Potentially a foolish plan that could never work, so crazy it was a good plan. And then we have the naming of the targets, the Taj, the Oberoi, Victoria Terminus, Karma Hospital, initially other bizarre targets thrown into there, mentions of Jews. Jews became a hot debate in Lashkar. Big section saying, don't do the Jews. Another section, the young section, saying, if we're going to embrace the Al-Qaeda strategy, we should do the Jewish target too. And so the marrying of Headley's mining of GPS data, target selection inside Mumbai, where he strode around as an affable American quaffing champagne and making friends. Marry that to the intelligence that's coming in to India and being observed on the outside, and what you have is the rise of a huge conspiracy, a massive plot with Mumbai at the core of the nexus.
And one that we see in retrospect, which apparently was invisible to everybody on this side, at least, when it was happening.
Is that a question or a statement?
I guess it's an observation, I was remembering this morning that the phrase signal to noise ratio was actually coined by an American analyst after the Second World War who was looking back at Pearl Harbor, figuring out that the Americans had significant and incontrovertible evidence that the attack was coming.
Yeah.
But again, it got lost in the sea of other data.
Yeah, thank you for finessing the argument, because you're absolutely right, and it'd be dangerous here to go down into the pit of absolute.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, as we all do, that 9/11 was the tragedy foretold.
Right.
You
right.
know, and Mark Mazzetti's somewhere here, and he'll, you know, trace the road of 9/11 through what was known and what wasn't. And 7/7 in London was remarkable in that we'd identified the key protagonist and recruiter. We've been watching his bizarre training camps in the Lake District as they humped bags of coal through the Peak District and the Lake District. And we had virtually all of the bombers photographed and yet couldn't identify the plot. Right. So you're absolutely right in finessing that. Yeah. But I would suggest something nevertheless slightly stronger, which was everything was available bar the date. Okay. And therefore, one question that surely should be answered at some point is a question about the development of intelligence. Right. And something that you've picked up on is the debacle of 9/11 and the debacle of 7/7 was met by extraordinary carnivorous commissions,
right.
which were not really self-serving, I don't think. I mean, if you look at the 560 pages produced by 9/11 Commission and the great books that came out after it, like Looming Tower by Lawrence Wright, and the digitized archive of evidence that came out of 7/7, what you feel is there's a capacity to admit.
Right.
And that capacity led to the revelation that our intelligence services were nowhere near as omnipresent as we thought,
right.
and that, like most human beings, they were selfish, they were stockpiling, they were not talking, they were not developing analysis. And I believe that quite significant changes came about through that act of humility.
Right.
Did that happen?
Right. That was going to be my question to you, is that do you see a similar learning happening in the subcontinent in India?
No.
No.
No, I think, you know, I was a little cruel and hasty when the book was launched, and I said some nasty things about Pradhan, and they were interpreted really personally. The Pradhan Commission was the response to 9/11. I was given an early copy of it in 2009 by someone in the commission who was horrified. And what they said when they gave me an early copy of what was going on was, look how we've been hamstrung. I've never really told that before. It was not, look what we're going to produce.
Right.
It was, my God, we are ashamed that we've been left to this. We can't interrogate intelligence. We can't touch the military. You know, we can refer to a very narrow remit. And there's a lot of, you know, what can we say? Arse saving going on, broadly speaking.
Right.
And how many pages was it? Can you recall ever reading it?
No.
64?
64, yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered, 64 pages, whether or not that could do the job.
Right. So in a sense, we are not learning from history, which means that it'll happen again, and not as first. It'll happen in very ugly ways. Which brings me to sort of a slight shift. What's really interesting about your project, both in this book and all the other books in general, is that you're making histories very soon after the fact, right? And that's a really interesting and ambiguous area. Can you in fact make reliable history so soon after the event?
Yeah, we're having a constant debate with each other, and Kathy says we can't, and I say we can, and you know, and that's still an ongoing process. I think we can try and tame some of the chaos, and with this epoch of terror that we're living in and have come through, some of these histories are so chaotic that the act of taming them itself and finding narratives does become significant, although it is the first draft of many things. I think I said to you over breakfast, the essence of this is not coming first, it's coming last.
Right.
You know, what we want to do is come last and then stay the longest and try and piece together. And we came to Mumbai and discovered that there was no timeline. There was no one timeline that everyone could agree on. There were multiple timelines, depending on whose perspective who was in the room.
Right.
Everyone had a very subjective timeline. And so in this book and in Deception, we created new timelines, and we used the same device in both books, one in 2004, one 9. And this book, The Siege, we tried to marry technical data with human knowledge.
Right.
And so we did a job of gathering in all of the photographic evidence, all of the CCTV, TV footage, press conference material, and we took all the metadata from that, and then we interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, and then we bolt the technical data to memories, And I could be talking to you and you could say, I was inside chambers and it was 2:40 and the knock came on the door and they said, please sir, now we're going to evacuate the private club in the Taj Hotel. And that's a compelling story, but the text message that you've sent to your colleague on the Times of India says 4:10.
Right.
And suddenly this becomes much more interesting because you can see the subjective notion of memory and how fear distorts everything. So by marrying the powerful story with the technical evidence, there became a compelling narrative, or at least a chronology, which we could then work on for narrative. So I think from that there is some sense of a real history. But it's still noise.
Right.
You know?
I mean, and it's astonishing what you do. And when you say this, I imagine you and Kathy in like one of these rooms out of Homeland or CSI with like 6 dozen television monitors and walls covered with pictures with little bits of string attached.
Yeah.
And analysts working busily on the... How do you do it? How do you manage all this?
I'm Carrie and she's Saul. She's like, I'm the mad maverick who's running around with witless theories, and she's got this very forensic logic, you know, and I'll have skipped over things looking for passionate characters and looking for scenes and scenarios, and she's mulling over various things and is normally 4 steps ahead of me. So there's an old chemicalness, that, you know, in the relationship which helps to make this work. But we've got a memory room, and inside that we create locations. And we do that literally, and so then we photograph everything in the location, and then we'll create a little section which will be the location, and then we stick data in the location, both actually and digitally on a computer, and then we work out a long narrative, and where the characters are going to fit in, and what the set pieces will be in real life, and then marry the data to the set pieces. And then somewhere along that road, I become exasperating. I've got so many set pieces that at that point, our domestic life transfers into the writing life, and there's some vengeance that takes place. There's some tit-for-tat rowing, and we sacrifice characters and arbitration, you know, who will do what, and, you know. But through that, I think it's just a joy to have 2 people grasping with such complex plots. Someone to pull you out of the rabbit hole. Someone to be blunt, a blunt force.
Yes.
So.
And I mean, all of this, the existence of all this information, I think we've already sort of exist behind that is this incredible, must be this incredible network. I remember the first book I read of yours was The Meadow, and I'm about 30 pages into it, and I was overcome with this feeling of delirious envy. Like, and what I was thinking was, how the hell did these guys have access? How did they make these people talk? And every book that I've read of yours, there's this sensation of this amazing, where does it come from? How do you stayed the longest, is that it?
They're love affairs, you know. There's a love affair a real love affair in these books. I think they're complete. Even the more empirical ones are a work of passion, and I hope that is an infectious passion. And I had a situation in the Meadow which maybe exemplifies this. A really good little vignette of someone I had been chasing very hard, and who had no interest in my ardour and rejected me continually. And I just sensed was really pivotal to understanding some of the Ikwan struggle, the secret war, the black war that was going on. And he was a ringmaster behind much of it, and because of that didn't want anything to do with me. And yet there's something of being the outsider that allows you to become a confessor conveniently. Maybe if you're outside but inside, in that you have a knowledge of all of the shorthand and the acronyms, you know, you can actually you can have knowledge but not live in that patch. You can take up the position of confessor. And I got invited eventually through sheer persistence to a picnic in Gandrabal, and I thought, wow, okay, what will happen? You know, boiled eggs and some bread, and we'll see, lemonade. And I turned up, and there was just a group of IB officials sitting on a blanket by the river, and I sat down with them in what became this sort of leisurely 4-hour intense session of extraordinary storytelling, and it looked like that in that situation people were waiting to reflect back on periods which had taken place in a very El Salvadorian period of life in Kashmir in the early to mid-90s. And I had this sense that there's this upwelling, you know, and that sometimes those stories are waiting to come out if you find the right situation.
Right.
And if you protect the people who are with you in this relationship, and they're friends for life, so
Right.
not just for Christmas.
Right. So there is then this enormous investment of time and effort, and sometimes over years, to talk to these people. And it seems to me, even if you're not saying it, but at some points you must be putting yourselves in positions of potential danger, right, in these events. So how do you cover yourself against that, or do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, risk is about management, as everyone says to you. So you have to work out your own tolerances. And to work out your tolerances, you have to be around for a long time. And, I first turned, my first posting was 94. And I was sent to Srinagar. I didn't know where Srinagar was. I turned up and I was just in horror. I couldn't identify any of the factions.
Right.
Someone said to me, go into the mountains. I said, which way? I just thought, what the hell? Why am I meant to be reporting here? I know nothing. I have no, no familiarity. And I think, to be honest with you, the first 10 years was unreliable. Much of what I wrote in reflection was so shallow, and full immersion is one answer to risk. Full immersion, knowing much more than you need to know, emphasizing complexity, although it frustrates publishers, and does nothing for translation rights. Working out detail as much as you can, and every schism and faction is really important, and and never refusing a meeting if the meeting's done in the right way, and finding settings that are safe and yet compelling for talking, and working out a get-out strategy as well as a get-in. And I had a fantastic meeting in the Lebanon just after shortly after another spate of kidnappings with a key figure in Hezbollah. And this is not an area, I just love Lebanon, and I love reporting and writing that comes out of the Lebanon. It's not my area, but I agreed to go to this meeting out of sheer bloody-minded curiosity, and it was too enticing. And I thought, I need a really good get-out plan, and I have no knowledge and no complexity. So I got a taxi and I left the door running, and I rang this guy and said, where are we going to meet? And he said, we're going to go for pizza in a place called Skoozies in Beirut. I thought, okay, taxi, pizza. And we turned up at the pizza place, and I said to the taxi driver, just stay there, stay by the door, door open. And I kind of went in, and the guy I was meeting was at the back, and I sat down and he looked at me and he said, is that your get-out strategy? And I was like, yeah. And he said, I'm having a calzone. What are you going to order? I was like, fuck, I'm such an amateur, And then I immediately got out of Beirut and went back to the stuff that I love. I was back in Pakistan thinking, I'm okay here. I'm in Karachi. I know what to do. And so there's a lesson, which is don't spread yourself too thin, manage your own risk. Children are a great objectifying force, when you're locked in on a project. And, the danger here is you fall in love with your material and your characters, and characters are real people. Situations are really like a drug, you're drawn into the plot, and you have to stop that, and children do that, Skype calls back home with,
Bring you back to sanity.
Yeah, where's my swimming gear? That's really necessary, when you're on the road to Quetta. So that saved me many times. And I think Kathy has an advantage over me, many, but one particular one is that she can operate without her face being visible. And so that has done her wonders.
So to go back a bit, in this effort to extract narrative and a kind of narrative sense out of chaos, who are your models? Who did you like?
Yeah. Yourself?
Thank you.
As a fan, a big fan. No, I liked a Diary of a Kidnapping. Became really important to me. If anyone's not read it, I really recommend reading Diary of a Kidnapping. It's just this remarkable way of a novelist tackling a great, unfathomable, unknowable event. Inside the kidnapping, it's a black box. Like the meadow, it's a black box. And normally what you can't know is what's going to happen inside the black box. And yet in this great book, he kind of becomes omnipotent and he knows everything. And yet everyone I know connected to that event said it was absolutely rooted in fact. So the novelist, moving on to fact, that became really important to me. And then if anyone reads Kapuscinski, the Polish journalist, Ryszard Kapuscinski, that was the second massive influence on both of our lives. For many reasons, I like the idea that this guy was operating with a Polish news agency at the time of communism. They had no money, and CNN would come in by plane and he'd go by bus. I like going by bus. He would be there last. He would stay longest because he had to work his way out of the situation as well as getting in. He had to learn language because he couldn't pay translators. He stayed in the cheapest hotel, so he got the grassroots feeling. Right. And whether or not, as we discussed earlier, everything he said was true, he managed to get to the right place at the right time throughout history, the fall of the Shah. He was there for Haile Selassie's demise. He was at a critical stage in the El Salvadorian War and did the same then in other places in South America and Central Asia. And I come back to those books time and time and time again and just love the detail. Right, right. His discovery of character out of reality, right. His huge sensitivity, the fact that he garnered very few complaints. This is really important in the modern age. You know, books that found a compelling audience. I fell in love with those books, and I still read them now and wonder at his charm, his insight, his perception. And he is the ultimate, and I hope this doesn't become my sort of mantra, but he's the insider, the outsider. Yes. You know, and I love the fact that he has that. And for me, I like to be on the outside looking in.
Looking in. I think we have time for a few questions. In the front here, do we have people with mics? Right here, second row.
Hello.
Hi.
I just wonder what was the objective besides creating terror. When they got into Taj Hotel in Bombay, they could have achieved much more larger objective by making people of different nationalities making their hostage and could have had their demands, but they did nothing. So what, besides creating terror, what was really, why was it so ill-planned in a way?
Yeah, it's a great question. Why did they only achieve what they did? Well, if you take it the other way, they, you know, the fourth largest city in the world was hijacked for 3 days on live TV. You know, the organization was failing. Its star was waning. Its membership was rock bottom. It was being divided and riven by younger men who wanted to go off to join the forces of Al-Qaeda. Here's a plot that married things back together, that tied two factions and grabbed the world headlines, and afterwards look at the recovery that Lashkar-e-Toiba's made. And there's something very crucial before that, which is that Lashkar, this was only really the manifestation of many other global operations. One of them prior to that was an attack on a nuclear base in Australia. And a dossier on that was passed to America but rejected because Lashkar is too difficult to look at because of its relationship to the military. And so really I think you know, they succeeded in everything they wanted to do.
Do you want to choose?
What has finally happened to this David Headley? He makes me really nervous. He reminds me of Charles Sabraj, who is in prison in Kathmandu, still trying to make his way out. So where is David Headley?
He's in jail, having received a mitigated sentence of 35 years, even though, you know, given the number of deaths, and if you look at the charge sheet, one would have expected a different kind of sentence, and I guess doing a deal now. You know, part of the deal was no extradition to India, limited access for NIA. You know, they got 2 cold days with a man who takes a lot of time to warm up. You know, the statement that he gave to the Indian authorities is full of lies and dissemination. Most of it's inaccurate and can't be trusted, not through the NIA's fault, but because of the kind of character. Compelling, deal-making. You know, there'll be another story with Headley coming soon.
I don't think it was supposed to be for me, but anyway. Adrian, you mentioned that your methodology has always been enter the last and stay for the longest. But my question is that in this strategy, don't you lose crucial data or crucial evidences once you enter the last? I mean, because a lot of evidences are really short-living. I mean, people leave, people don't talk. So don't you lose the crucial data if you enter the last?
Yeah, I think it's the opposite. I think the opposite is proven to be true. I began as a foreign correspondent who was ordered by his office in London to be first. And the first draft is the least reliable. It's just a superficial collection of certain facts, none of which are actually rooted or fixed to the mast. And in fact, the more time that you leave, the more data that can be accrued, the more characters settle, the more tragedy dissipates, the more people feel capable of talking. And in the case of Kashmir, 15 years proved to be the right time for certain stories to emerge, because some of them so horrified the people involved in them at how they'd lost their humanity because of the scale and ferocity of the conflict. It took that time for them to come forward. And, you know, I tried repeatedly for 15 years, and it was at the 15-year mark that certain things actually emerged, and I thought, I'm really glad I waited.
Right here.
Thank you for that amazing, amazing talk. I wanted to go back to what was said yesterday in a talk, which was, does India think strategically enough? And to go back to connect it to what Vikram said about whether we've learned our lessons. I'm going to put you in a slightly difficult position and ask this question. What would you advise the Indian security establishment if we wanted to never have this again, Mumbai?
I'm not going to take that offer, thank you. I think some observations were made to me by people who talked. And, you know, people really want to talk because there's a feeling of huge frustration, fear, anger and depression within security agencies in India, that there are seismic changes that need to take place in terms of encouraging entrepreneurialness, and changing the hierarchical structure of the organisations. There's a perception internally that you become rich if you're a policeman, if you're IPS, and you become poor if you're dedicated to intelligence. And therefore, structurally, there are things that need to be addressed to ensure it's a career, and that the brightest and the best come into a movement, and there's oversight to look at the way in which that works. But there are other issues too to do with stovepiping and infighting between different agencies. Britain was crippled by it, America's still suffering by it, and I kind of think that there are issues that should come out of the Commission of Inquiry. Lessons learned facility, one of those exists in every jihad outfit, and yet the state has none in India. You know, I heard someone giving a press conference a statement saying, oh, well, it'll happen in private. I don't think that's the answer. I think something more excoriating that happens in public that actually calls people to answer should be the way forward, and yet that's been roundly rejected.
Over there.
As you said that David Headley was an American mole, he was the one who suggested to Lashkar-e-Taiba to attack Mumbai, and they were not convinced initially, and then he was the one who convinced them. And then American intelligence knew about the attack, didn't do anything about it. Few months later, America signs $4 billion arms deals with India. Is it that kind of truth which we don't want to believe because it's very simple? And David Headley is still, you know, we're trying to strike another deal?
Yeah, I think there are some significant factors. There was a showdown after Mumbai when those questions were put very harshly and very forcibly between the two sides. And the American response was, we gave you everything. And the Indian response was it was shorn of all the crucial identifying factors that made it significant. So, you know, yet again, there's an issue to do with the way in which ideas are developed, the interplay between those ideas. Could they have caught Headley anyhow? Could they have caught the plotters anyhow? Knowing a lot isn't the same as doing a lot. That part of the conspiracy is the hardest to plot, and that's why we were the vaguest on it, because, you know, I have an opinion on that, but that may be rooted in 20 years of working in the region rather than actually on what I know because of what I've read.
Over there.
This is a question you can easily answer, I hope, and also solve. I can't lay my hands on your book called Deception.
Yeah.
I read Siege and I picked up the others, but I'm not able to get Deception.
We're just doing a digital copy for the first time ever, which will be coming out in the next month, and it's a terrible thing that you know, books do slip in and out. You know, it is. I thought the best way to do it is to put it up as an e-book, and then everyone can download it, and it'll be around in about 4 to 5 weeks. It'll be available in Landmark, in Amazon, and you know, if that's no good for you, could get someone to print it out and give you a copy, but otherwise, ABE Books, good bookseller.
Right there.
Adrian, Mike, question to you is, when you read you're an insider it, and yet how do you remain an outsider when you present it? And the second aspect of that is, again, being an outsider as an insider, do people talk to you more readily than they would talk to, say, somebody like us?
Oh. I don't know, it's been working for me so far, the outsiderly, insiderly thing. I come from a family of outsiderly, insiderlies, so I probably had no choice. I've come from a family that's been in flight its entire life. They were in flight from 1938, always flying. You know, I had a grandmother and a grandfather who fell in love and then hid in a hole in the ground in someone's garden until the right time came in 1942 to get out of the hole and fly. And I had a great uncle who used to tell me stories when he was fingerless of how he clung underneath the train carriage in freezing weather and his fingers fell off with frostbite as they crossed the border in Austria. And I was brought up with this idea in a house which was a babel of languages, none of which were English, that somehow it was good to perch on the outside. And I had a very rude grandmother who loudly criticized everyone who came to the house in a language they couldn't understand. And that view has done me wonders as I've learned more Hindi and Urdu, and I tell no one I can speak any, and I enter into government rooms and listen to everything that happens.
You know, a number of Americans were killed in Mumbai, yet the Americans seem to be so soft on Pakistan, limited access to Headley, that farce of a trial in Pakistan. They don't seem to be, you know, is it to do with Afghanistan? Why are they so soft on Pakistan when it comes to cracking down on Lashkar?
They had no purchase. You know, they had purchase with Musharraf at a certain period of time, and that dossier was rejected. There's a brilliant and intriguing French terrorist judge who did the best work of the conspiracy mounting in Europe, a guy called Jean-Luc Bruguière. His dossier was taken to America. It's a really compelling document. It was written in English, not in French, and it was rejected roundly. It asked some very difficult questions about the nexus between the deep state and Lashkar, and those questions were unpopular at that time in 2007 when America was floundering and needed allies. And I think the management of the jihad factory is now a nightmare question for Pakistan itself. I think, you know, if one looks at the last couple of days, Tablighi Jamaat was attacked. The Sufi shrines have been under attack. If you looked at the figures published, 4,731 deaths in Pakistan from terrorism-related bombings. It's horrific what's happening inside the country as it tears itself to pieces, as well as the export of terror and the political manifestations of that. So there's some deep and profound questions that need to be answered inside the country about engagement with the jihad factory.
Over here.
Adrian, I want to know what kind of understanding and you know, coordination is there between Al-Qaeda and other jihadi outfits like Lashkar, Huji, you know, Harkatul Ansar, and are there people in these organizations who ensure that there is no, you know, conflict between them?
That's an interesting question. To start with, if you go to Muridka, which is the university and luxury sports complex of Lashkar-e-Toiba outside Lahore, not really luxury, that's a bit of a cheap joke. The swimming pool's kind of rotten. But if you go inside there and you spend any time, you see the security that's provided inside there. Hafiz Saeed lives in this amazing Greco-Roman villa, which is kind of loosely based on the Temple of Porcinus. And in front of it is a phalanx of state-supplied security, and they're there to protect him from Pakistan Taliban. And so there is still a huge amount of animosity post-Lal Masjid and the Red Mosque attack about the state supporting, the state that's now the enemy, supporting an operation like Lashkar-e-Toiba. And yet another faction of it is allied very closely with Al-Qaeda, and they come from different jurisprudence, they come from a different background. One thing that happened is that Lal Masjid is the most seismic event, and you should never forget 2007 and the raid on the mosque. That event, and after that event, changed the entire makeup of jihad and the jihad factory, and groups that had nothing in common in terms of jurisprudence, practice, military strategy, or goal came together in a marriage of convenience. And suddenly you had wedding caterers being called up to Miran Shah to account for the number of people who were arriving, who were disgusted with the military state and wanted to sit down together to dine and then to form military strategy. And the bomb factories changed, the nature of the ordnance changed, you can actually go from that point onwards, looking at the forensic evidence, to see the way in which the imagination of the jihad changed as they worked out new technology. They moved from using lo-fi doorbell bombs into using hi-fi chemical bombs, and that's because they could call upon new kinds of bomb makers who were coming out of Egypt and joining up with a more local struggle. And on the ground level, you'd have people who understood the streets in Karachi from the Punjab, from Sip al-Sahaba and Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, moving the trucks, being the Oompa Loompas who carry the sacks. And so actually, the people to talk to understand this are the guys who do scenes of crime. Because when they turn up at every bombing, what they see is the marriage between these outfits by analysing the technology evolving. Just one small indicator, a very interesting factor, that prior to the marriage of convenience, suicide bombers looked down to prey, and the heads, they looked up to prey, and the heads were cleanly severed. And there was one man paid to go around collecting the heads to identify who the bombers were. After the marriage of convenience in 2007, they pray looking downwards to destroy the faces, so no identification could come about. And that fact, the development came from Al-Qaeda.
Thanks, Adrian. It's been a very engaging talk. My question is, how do you think, what do you think about, in terms of the training and the recruitment for organizations like Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations? How do they go about training new people into their organizations? How do they get the funding?
I think there's a lot of displacement. Look what's happening. Look what's happening now. I think we lost. We concentrated on the short-term war, the hot war with the drone strikes, which we thought was decapitating an organization. And yet, if you look at the methodology, in 1988, bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri was looking at Nairobi. They were in Afghanistan looking at Nairobi. And when they were looking at Nairobi, they were looking at Nairobi because they were thinking of Somalia. And in fact, in 1988, when they were making the path and sending the outreach to work in Nairobi, what they were thinking was America will be in Somalia. And then Black Hawk Down happened in 1993. And we now know that that was an Al-Qaeda attack, Al-Qaeda inspired and trained. And you have to use that logic because we've kind of lost sense of that narrative. Look what's happening now in Syria. Look what's happened through the Arab Spring and what's happening in Libya. Look at the displacement that's taken place, and then ask yourself whether or not, as David Cameron said in this very glib way, mission accomplished in Afghanistan. I mean, really, what a foolish thing to say. I just see a process of displacement, a lot more converts coming in, people who are also gung-ho militarists, younger, attracted to the fight in Syria, who will come back into European countries, particularly the UK, and that blowback's going to be critical, watching how that happens and how it spills over. So that would be one impression I'd give you.
Right here in front.
Thank you, Adrian, for bringing 2611. Two questions, very brief, connected to the lady at the back. We've never got to know what sort of an agent was David Headley and why did he get this huge amnesty in America? They've never told us. They never told us, they never even allowed us to tape record what our intelligence agencies did in the United States. Last question. Did the intelligence agencies of India, you've given great advice, NIA came up because of that. Did the intelligence agencies get hold of you and pick up all the data that you had collected for your book?
Maybe in another guise, So far, no. No, not in any way, shape or form. And there are lots of unknowables. Let's not try and say we know everything. I can describe to you my Kathy's grand strategy of nailing fact with character and trying to make a narrative and tell these stories. But there are many unknowables, and I worry about them and puzzle about them and leave them to one side as another project, thinking I've got to come back to that. Headley relationship is infuriating by how little we know, really. Although we could talk about him all afternoon, we still know remarkably little about really the deal, the nature of that deal, and the essence of that deal. And I could make some guesswork on that. But I think what will become clear with that is what happens in the next 15 years. There'll be another fantastic look probably in that period of time when he's beginning to negotiate his way out of his jail sentence. Did India do as best as it could out of that deal? I mean, that's something to ask the next government that comes in. I think you should treat Mumbai as the benchmark. It is not another attack, and people should stop saying it. It was a watershed, you know, and it should be the benchmark for the next government. Many questions to be asked about 2611 to every new administration. How do you view it? What is your view on it? How should India change? Don't ask me, ask them, you know, and maybe vote accordingly.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My first question is there. How does the global and all the countries need to fight against this terrorism? Might terrorism be in any country, but the whole world is being harmed by this. So how does whole world can come together against this terrorism?
It's a great question. It's another panel. William's down there. I fill another panel. It's a really hard one to answer. I'd need a long time to think about it. And, you know, I think so many great minds looking at de-radicalization in different countries. I went to a great school which I've been filming in on and off for 2 years in the Swat Valley, looking at the issue of de-radicalization. And the reason the school is really important is it's the first data that can be looked at as to who becomes used and manipulated as suicide bombers. They're children who are unsuccessful in their operation, obviously, in the school. So those projects are very important. There's a very important project like that in Indonesia, and one in Saudi that appears to be failing. And so actually culling that data is significant, looking at recruiting strategy, and then looking at the way we lost track of our narrative. I mean, Mark Mazzetti has traced it brilliantly in his book, The Way of the Knife. But if you look at the way in which we lost the narrative, and in fact, you know, the argument for Al-Qaeda became compelling once again after Egypt, after the supporting of the non-coup, our call for democracy, our failure to accept democracy in the shape that in which it rose in Cairo, renditions, torture. There are many issues we have to grapple with. Our message is incoherent, and so that would be one response I'd have.
Is back there in the middle?
You mentioned Lal Masjid. That was, I think, started because the Chinese pressed on the Pakistanis. Now my question is, can Chinese then now, since their outfits in Afghanistan are being hurt by Taliban and all these, can they press on Pakistan and combine with India to manage the situation?
Well, it's another panel, William, again. That's not me. I think China's amazingly significant. I mean, interception, I only really realized when I got to meet the foreign ministry who did the first ever deal with China, how much it meant to the establishment in Pakistan, and it shaped the whole culture of everything to come. If you trace the relationship between China and Pakistan, you understand entirely the evolution of foreign policy, the rise of the Pakistan bomb, the rise of the sort of adventurism in Pakistan too. So for me, it's a critical relationship, and of course it has a play in Afghanistan now, definitely.
Can we take one last quick question? Right there behind you.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Sir, American forces are going back from Afghanistan in 2014. And Afghanistan is a totally unstable nation. So in the next years, the Taliban will be promoted after American retreats. So who will play the crucial role, and how can the peace be restored in this Indian subcontinent region?
Well, you know, I'm reporting in this area constantly and looking at ways to see that myself. I mean, there's so many unknowables, and to coin a phrase I heard yesterday, I'm not going to be the mystic Meg that's going to look into the crystal ball with that. I want to look back a bit to see how we reached that point, and I'm going to spend the next couple of years looking from Tora Bora onwards. I actually want to know how we reached the point that we're at now in order to understand a bit more of where we're going. And so, you know, I'm going to dedicate a lot of time in filling in the missing years from Tora Bora to Abbottabad and look at the prequel to Zero Dark 30. So that's going to be my concentration, really.
You heard it here first. That's the next book. I want to say thank you to Adrian for this wonderful talk, and thank you for coming.
Thanks very much indeed. Cheers, dude.